Okay, so 3 tests down. Thankfully, if you're English, if you're neutral, if you love cricket, England managed to win the third one, which means the Ashes is still very much alive as we go to Old Trafford. What better time to talk about where we are in the series and what's going to happen next with 2 great cricket writers, Mike Atherton, the chief cricket correspondent, former England captain, and Gideon Haigh of the Australian, also write for the Times as well. Morning to both of you.
Morning.
Thank God, I suppose. Gideon, let me start with you. We spoke last time how even the Aussies want this to be a series, don't they? If this had gone the other way and the Australia were 3-0 up, that wouldn't have been a great result for anybody, maybe.
No. Well, I mean, I'm first and foremost a journalist, probably second an Ashes devotee, and third an Australian, and the first 2 identities swamp the third in matters like this. You want to see great cricket, you want to see close results, and my word, we've had them. You know, either team could be 3-0 up by now, or trailing love 3. We've actually got a series that's as close as you can get to perfectly poised. We've had 14 days of cricket out of 15. Now, these have been test matches that have shown the full panoply of skills, where every team has had the opportunities to make waves. It's been very high quality cricket. It's been full of mistakes, which kind of has the strange effect of sort of humanising it. You're constantly reminded that these players are mere flesh and blood, as good as they are, and they're both right in the contest. And I think they're loving it as much as we are.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Athens, did England do anything different? Because they lost the first 2, but did they win the third one playing the same way in Europe?
I think they did 2 things different. First of all, they made some changes to the team, and they brought in 3 players who all had a significant role to play. So Mark Wood was man of the match in the end. He blew Australia's tail away in the first innings, scored vital runs in the first innings and the second. He was there with Chris Woakes at the end of the game. So he was the first change. Chris Woakes himself, 6 wickets and a match-winning innings on that final tense afternoon. And Moeen Ali, who took 2 key wickets in Australia's second innings, Smith and Labuschagne, just when it looked as though Australia might have the game in their grasp. So that was one changing they made to the shape of their team. And the other change was, I think they slightly just dialed it down a little bit from Lords, where they were with the bats at Lords, and Harry Brook's innings in the second innings at Leeds showed that to me. I mean, he played a bit indulgently at Lords. You know, he got out swiping and backing away and almost got bowled there. And he knuckled down and played as Harry Brook can on the final day. He played excellently for his 75. So I think they probably just thought maybe they'd gone to an extreme. They just brought it back a little bit. But they're still looking to take the game on and looking to be aggressive. But maybe not quite to the extent that they did at Lords.
And Gideon, pace is an amazing thing, isn't it? I mean, watching all 3 games, the difference with having Mark Wood to be able to bowl quickly seemed to be absolutely telling in all this.
Yes, it was. I mean, imagine how useful he would have been on the last day at Edgbaston to blowing away that Australian tail. But obviously he wasn't 100% fit. I suspect that England have had in mind all summer to play him at Headingley and at Manchester, where the pitches are probably a bit more conducive to his skills. And my word, it makes you sit up straight. It makes you feel a bit uncomfortable in your seat, even when you're not facing it. And blowing away a tail is something that Australia has been very good at historically over the last few years, and England have now developed that skill. It deserted them, of course, at Edgbaston when they needed it most, but it was fascinating to see the way in which it made a difference to the tenor of that match. Australia went from a position of relative strength to one of parity. And then in the third innings, where England successfully bottled Australia up just when they threatened to run away with the game, that's something that was a little bit reminiscent of Headingley 2019. That game was kind of, even before Stokes got out there, Stokes with the ball was as important as Stokes with the bat in that great Test match 4 years ago. And England did a fantastic job of just preventing Australia running away. At one stage, they were one down with almost a 100-run lead, and in a low-scoring Test match, that should almost have been shutout time. But they kept tapping Australia on the shoulder. They kept taking wickets at unhelpful opportunities for Australia. And I guess the other thing we have to point out, in all fairness, is England had much the best of the conditions at Headingley. It seemed that the minute Australia came into bat, the clouds descended, and when England went into bat, the clouds cleared. But that's cricket.
Yeah, indeed. Athers, what's it like when you're facing someone that fast? I mean, who did you face that was up at 95 miles an hour? There must have been some of the West Indians when you were playing. Were they that quick? What's it like when you're playing people who are a bit quicker than even the quicks around?
Well, it's a rare thing, and Mark Wood was bowling at a pace that is rarely seen. He was up at 95, 96 miles an hour in that first spell. And you get a lot of bowlers who are between 85 and 90. Australia's bowlers, Pat Cummins, Mitchell Starc, they're quick, and they're probably just topping 90, but there is a massive difference between 90 and 95 miles an hour. It doesn't sound a lot, but I can tell you 22 yards away, it's a huge difference. You've basically got 0.4 of a second at that speed from the ball leaving the hand to you having to make all the decisions you have to make as a batter. What shot you're going to play, are you going to play it, are you going to leave it, where are you going to look to hit the ball, what are you going to do? 0.4 of a second, that's the blink of an eye, really. So, I mean, you're not frightened as a top-class player because it's what you're trained to do, but it puts you on your toes. You're pretty aware that at that pace, he can hit you and he can hurt you, and of course he can make you look silly by getting you out. And Mark Wood there was as quick as anything I've seen in an England shirt. Only Mark Wood himself, actually, before has bowled that quickly. From what I've seen in the last 20 or 30 years, we've had quick bowlers. Jofra Archer himself, in a funny way, I think Jofra Archer is more difficult to face. But actually, pure speed through the air, I'm not sure he's quite as quick as Mark Wood. Devon Malcolm, when I played, was very, very quick. They all have their different quirks, and they're not all easy to face because of the kind of action they have. In terms of the ones I faced, Brett Lee, Alan Donald and Shoaib Akhtar were at that level, and it's really quick.
And presumably, does it? I think you might have said this on commentary, Athers, that they might get other bowlers wickets.
Absolutely.
Because you've got a mindset, you're out of your rhythm, and then some slow bloke at the other end can capitalise.
Absolutely, and Moeen Ali got Marnus Labuschagne and Stephen Smith, which is the period Gideon was talking to, where really Australia had that game, and they could have really run away with it at that point. And I'm not saying Moeen Ali got them because of Mark Wood, but there is that factor when somebody's steaming in at 95 miles an hour at the other end. It can make you do silly things. I remember way back from my own career, I think third or fourth first-class game that I played, I was facing Malcolm Marshall at one end, who was a brilliant quick bowler from the West Indies, and got out to Nigel Cowley twice at the other, who was this little kind of gentle off-spinner. And you're just not thinking straight sometimes. You're so happy to be away from the fast bowler, you just, you do something silly to the off-spinner. Mark Wood as well he's a brilliant character. You can just see it. It oozes from every pore of him, really. He's just a great enthusiast. He's a very popular member of the team. He's got this kind of zany sense of humour, and he just lifts everybody around him. So the combination of that really quick bowling, which is a point of difference for England from Australia, and then his character just lifting everybody around him, he's a great addition to the team.
And his batting is absolutely critical in this game. Because, how do you captain against a guy who's basically just trying to hit every ball for six? I think Cummins was really consternated. He did not know how to respond in those circumstances. He tried to be sensible, then he tried to be funky, and the game, in a low-scoring game, a critical 20 can just completely change the complexion of things.
If Australia won Gideon, would we be talking about Marsh as the difference maker? That feels like he came into the team and changed the pace of the batting, because he came in and hit 100 off 100, didn't he?
He did, yeah. There's a certain freedom that comes with coming into a team when you don't expect to play, when you're kind of a last-minute inclusion, it's just all kind of upside. And it remains to be seen whether Marsh is picked for the next test, because Cameron Green will almost certainly be available.
He'll have to be picked, Rhodes, because Green hasn't looked very strong in the first two. Is that fair to say?
No, I think, Green obviously has never been to England before. This is his first experience of these conditions. I think Green puts quite a lot of pressure on himself. He's a very young man. He's a very earnest man. You can tell there is a certain sort of tension and rigidity about his technique, whereas Marsh was here just able to play with absolute freedom. I don't think I've ever seen his feet move as well. He's always been a beautiful striker of the ball, but he was making very, very precise footwork. So he's going a long way forward and going a long way back, and the margin for error for the bowlers was pretty minimal. Yeah, he was probably the one Australian bat who looked comfortable against Wood, because he's got that very, very powerful repertoire of cross-bat shots. So look, that's the test these days. For cricketers, they spend a long time waiting. A lot of the time they're kind of in positions where they're not quite sure whether they're going to be playing the following day, and it's up to them to be psychologically ready to do so. And Marsh passed that test with flying colours.
Athers, how much do we need to worry about Stokes? I mean, he can't bowl. Watching him bat the first innings was heroic. It was amazing, but I mean, he could barely move. And they've got 9 days off till Old Trafford, so there's a space now to get better. But is there a fear that he can't play, or is he just going to be knocked up during this Ashes and never be at his full best? I mean, certainly as a bowler.
Well, he's going to play, he's going to captain, he's going to bat, but I think you're right. It's a real issue for England that he can't bowl, and it's an issue for the balance of the side. It really has an impact upon England's selection, and it had an impact in this game because they don't feel, or Stokes didn't feel he could bowl, so they got to play 5 frontline bowlers, but that then impacts upon the balance of the batting down below, so they wanted Woakes and Moeen Ali, who are 2 bowlers that can bat. You can't be picking 5 bowlers who can't bat, and that will be the same moving forward, I would imagine, at Old Trafford. And that then impacts around the Bairstow-Folkes decision, because a lot of people are saying bring back Folkes, and the only way you can argue that, I think, with the balance of the side as is, if you feel Folkes is going to get more runs than Bairstow, because they're already weakening the batting. So it has a lot of impacts upon selection, but I think you're right. I don't think Stokes will bowl very much now in this series. And maybe, that's his days as a genuine all-rounder have come to an end. I don't know how debilitating the knee injury is going forward, but right now, he's only going to bowl in an emergency, if at all.
And he's a good enough bat, isn't he? I mean, as we've seen this series, he can live as England captain as a batsman.
Absolutely, but people are saying maybe he should go to number 3, but I don't buy that. I think Stokes at 6 is the place for him. He comes in when the game is on the line, when almost all is lost, and seems to bring the best out of him when he has that responsibility alone for almost getting England over the line. So one of the problems England have is that a lot of their batters like to bat at 5 and 6. Harry look much better at 5. That's why they shove Moeen Ali up to 3. Stokes himself, Bairstow, Root doesn't like to move from 4. So they've got to find a number 3 from somewhere, and it's not straightforward what they'll do.
What do you think they should do? It's a really good point, that, because it seems to me ludicrous that a man who wasn't even playing Test cricket was put in at number 3 to steer them home on a must-win Ashes last day. And if you had to try and point to a problem of how fragile this England team is, Moeen Ali at number 3 is a pretty good symbol of that, isn't it? What would you do to solve this problem?
Yeah, well, I mean, in some ways, England's never really replaced Jonathan Trott. We was such magnificent value at number 3, such a fantastic pace setter, such a terrific stabilising influence. It's strange, isn't it, that players are so sort of superstitiously attached to their places in the order. Root's reluctance to bat number 3. It's strange because it's they're obviously not buying him very much time. If number 3 is going to get blown away, as Moeen Ali was on that last day, then he might as well be batting number 3. But psychologically, it can be quite difficult to shift from the positions where one's had success before. Classic example in my time for Australia has been Michael Clarke, who you wouldn't have thought there was a huge difference between batting number 4 and number 5. But I think at number 4, his average was something like 20, and his average at number 5 was something like 60. So, I don't know, some players get grooved. They associate their roles with success. They find it difficult to shift. Mike was arguing before the Test match, I think quite rightly, that it should be Root's job. He's the best player in that English order. Number 3 is, generally speaking, the place where the best player in the order goes. It's only a temporary fix. Of course, the only reason that this vacancy is open is because Ollie Pope is injured. I don't see any reason why Root can't do the job for the last 2 Test matches of the series. But I think England's has possibly made a minor problem worse by coming up with temporary solutions.
Yeah, and Athens, presumably as captain, I know Root's the former captain. So don't say to him, we've lost our number 3. You're our best batsman. We don't have a number 3. You're going in at number 3.
You could do. You've got to be careful how you treat people. I mean, that's the art of captaincy, really, not just the tactical, strategic side of the game, but your empathetic treatment of the players around you. Root has tried at number 3 on many occasions. They've got a reasonable record there, but as Gideon said, it's nowhere near the record he's got at number 4. And the move to put Moeen Ali up to 3 was not really about Moeen Ali. It was about Harry Brook to try and protect him and put him back at number 5. So I'm not sure what they do. I think I agree with you. I think I would try and put the heavy hand on Joe Root and say, how about it? But, if he is your best player, he's somebody who is extremely loyal to Stokes. If he said, look, I really want to stay at 4, you'd have to think very carefully about moving.
Sorry, Gideon, you were going to say something now.
I mean, this is the paradox of team sport, isn't it? Or the tension between the individual in cricket and the corporate entity. Bazball, at least as I understand it, is all about the team, the greater interests of the team, but it's also about we promise you the settings that will best enable you to succeed. It's a non-coercive environment. It exists to allow the players freedom to express themselves. So it's an inaction of a traditional cricket dilemma. Root would solve this by saying, "I'll do it," but clearly some part of him is just holding him back at the moment. But he's got a week to think about it, and a week can make a big difference.
Gideon, speaking of the greater good, for Australia, is it the greater good of the team for Warner to be thanked for his tremendous service and told to retire early?
Look, interestingly, I think Warner's situation, it was a little bit results dependent. And he may have benefited from the fact that Australia lost, because I suspect that if Australia had won and the Ashes was decided, there would have been a strong argument for giving Marcus Harris the opportunity to have 2 Test matches to audition as Warner's successor. I think that the Australian pattern over the last few years has been to accent experience, to say that, experienced players win you games, they win you clutch moments. So I suspect they'll probably sheer back towards picking Warner for the 4th Test. There was something a little bit disturbing about Warner's dismissals at Headingley. I thought he'd batted okay in the first couple of Test matches. He was making good shapes, he was making the right noises, he was being positive. But that was 2019 all over again, wasn't it? Those 2 nick-offs. And Broad is definitely in Warner's head. There's no doubt about it. We should actually talk about Stuart Broad. I mean, Stuart Broad's been fantastic this summer. Here's a guy who's 37, who's played 167 tests, who is bowling as well as he ever has. He's taken more wickets and bowled more overs than any bowler on either side. he's just been outstanding, and he's just relishing the contest. You always want the player who wants to be in the centre of the contest. In some respects, David Warner has been that for Australia over the years. So it's a fantastic head-to-head competition between these two players who have been, the hero of 1,000 fights for both their sides.
But it's an unequal battle at the minute because Broad seems to own him. Athers, I'll ask this question delicately. That must have happened to you as an opening batsman. You had to go out and face the people you mentioned before, and there was a ball that you got out to a lot, wasn't there? And is that in your head when you're walking out? What's the feeling?
Definitely, it's a nightmare. And there's no escape from it. It usually is the case that it's an opening batter against an opening bowler when these kind of weaknesses arrive for a batter, because you're going out to face the same guy with a new ball time and time again, and a 5-test series makes that worse because a lot of test series these days are just 2 test matches. And imagine if you're David Warner, after 2 test matches, you get away from facing Broad in England and you go and face whoever and get a load of runs, and you're away again. But there is no escape from it in a 5-test match series. Time and time again, you have to keep coming back and facing the same guy. And if they start to just prize open a little weakness in your technique, it is impossible to escape from. Now, I admire the way David Warner goes about it. He still looks up for the contest. His body language is excellent. But he keeps getting out to Broad 17 times now. I would probably stick with him. Partly for his catching. His slip catching is of his usual high standard, and that's a big factor for Australia, given the quality of their pace attack. But it is one area of Australia's team that England are just starting to find some weaknesses. Todd Murphy is another in the absence of Nathan Lyon. Scott Boland is another, just 2 wickets and leaking runs, and the balance of the team in the absence of Lyon. So there are areas that England are starting to worry away at, and David Warner is certainly one of those.
And did the fielders remind you of it when you go out to bat, and the words like bunny thrown around at you in that situation?
What do you think?
I can imagine. I've heard people thinking it's a very polite athlete. So I don't know.
They may do it politely or they may not, but it gets and it certainly got mentioned to me, and I'm sure England will be having a quiet word here or there. Just you don't even have to do it directly to the batters. What was you doing it in his hearing? He will hear it.
I could not little bit in that. Athers mentioned the catching there, Gideon. Is it me, or is this not been particularly good quality fielding series? I can't think of as many tests I've seen where there've been so many drop catches. Is that it? Doesn't feel like the fielding's been up to perhaps the batting and the bowler.
Yeah, well, I talked about the very high quality of the series in some respects and the error-ridden quality of the play in others. But that's not paradoxical. One is the function of the other. When cricket is played in high-pressure situations and every catch counts, it's very easy not to do those things that come naturally. It's very easy to kind of second-guess yourself. Bairstow had another terrible game at Haigh, but Root's having a poor time at slip. I think he's taken 8 and he's dropped 5. That's a degree of fallibility that really shouldn't at a test match class shouldn't take place. Interestingly, Mark Taylor was commenting in comms. Michael, you might have heard him during the test match, that he thinks that close-in catching is one area of the game that he feels has not improved since he played. I wonder what he puts that down to.
Well, he didn't go on to expand why, but I mean he was an excellent slip fielder himself, a very, very safe catcher at first slip, and in that team he had an excellent wicketkeeper in Ian Healy, Mark himself at first slip, Mark Waugh at second, Shane Warne. These were all top class fielders. I don't know whether it's an area that hasn't improved. Most areas of the game have. Certainly the outfielding, and there was a brilliant stop on the boundary edge right towards the end of that game by Todd Murphy when he flicked it back in for Steve Smith. I think both of them were out on the boundary, and that kind of relay catching, relay fielding on the boundary edge, because of T20 cricket and because six hitting is such a function and part of that game. People's fielding now on the boundary edge is just totally different and better from where it was. Was slip catching maybe close and slip catching? Who knows? Australia that
You didn't
were
have slips in. You didn't have slips in. You didn't have slips in T20, do you? Really? So,
yeah, but maybe that's the thing. Mark's coach at that stage was Bobby Simpson, who was a brilliant slip fielder himself. He was coach at Lancashire and I was there, and he used to work people like Stink and slips. You'd be catching hundreds of balls a day if Bobby Simpson was your coach. Maybe Mark's right, yeah.
Before we go, I want your predictions for Old Trafford. I also just want we just realised that you guys are living together during the Ashes. Gideon, when you come to the Ashes in England, do you always stay at Casa Atherton? What's it like? What sort of host is he?
Since 2009, I'll be the same. Mike has been an extremely hospitable host for me, but in some ways has made these journeys possible because I think he's probably subtly subsidised the times. Mike's house is exactly what you would expect. It is perfectly tasteful. It is well appointed without being ostentatious. There are absolutely no mementos of Mike's career here. You would hardly know that he'd played Test cricket before. I remember the first time I ever came to Mike's place, his son was playing with a bat that Mike had used to make an ODI 100, which his son had been carelessly leaving out on the grass, so to become completely waterlogged and eventually had to be discarded.
Drinking up at Old Trafford. Gideon, start with you. What's the prediction?
Good. As England, I'm desperate for Indian Peru. Even more desperate than before because the idea of once again going 2-2 to the Oval is just too tempting. And I think that England have a touch of momentum now. I don't like the idea of momentum. I don't think cricket is Newtonian. I think these days teams are very good at striking back from defeat. But Mark Wood on a pitch which will probably have a little bit more as much pace and carry as Headingley. That's a very exciting prospect, and Australia will not relish it.
Well, I got a bit of stick from our readers for a piece I wrote immediately after Lords saying, don't despair, England can come back, it's not impossible. And I stick with that simply because, all the games have been incredibly tight. The margins have been 2 wickets, 3 wickets, 43 runs. As Gideon said at the start, Australia could be 3-0 up, they could be 3-0 down. England exactly the same. So anybody who says England have not got a prayer of winning the next 2 games just hasn't been watching what we've seen. They could easily win both games. They could easily lose both games. It's impossible to call, but they have a chance because the 2 teams are closely matched. The conditions in England making that an even closer match than it might otherwise be. Every chance.
So, guys, it's been as ever a great joy speaking to you. Now I know that you live together as well. That's an even happier thought for me somehow. And look, if you watched all of this, you clearly love cricket. We all love cricket. The best place in the world to read cricket is in the pages of the Times. So as this Ashes series builds, hopefully to a climax at the Oval, make sure you're reading Gideon and Mike Atherton in the Times.